this table gives us a good summary of the different responses, but sometimes it helps to have a view of the centre of the data or the average of the data. Now there are 3 different types of average. The mean, which takes into account every value, the median, which is the middle value when they are organised in size order, and there is the mode, which is the value that occurs the most. In this research, we're interested in the mean, so if we add up all of the values that people have given us and divide by how many numbers there are, we have a calculation that represents the mean. Now the only problem with this is that if we go back to the original data, how do I find the mean of these words or phrases? These need to be numbers in order for me to do this. Often on a questionnaire you will see a rating scale. Sometimes it will give you the question, such as how important to you when choosing a career is a job that you will find enjoyable, and it will ask you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is not at all important and 5 is very important. Sometimes those scales are created using words, as in the example of our questionnaire. So the number or rating is equivalent to the categories or the words that we could have used. A tip when you're analysing data: it can become very cluttered on a worksheet when you're doing a range of different calculations. And so often it helps to copy the data onto a new sheet and to work on that for the next set of calculations. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select the original data, copy it, go to a blank worksheet, and I know I'm going to need some labels, so I'm going to start in the second column and I'm going to paste it. So this data is looking at 2 sets of almost identical questions. The first questions are asking about how important different elements are to the students, and the second set of questions are asking what students expect it to be like in their industry. So to make my life much easier, I'm going to colour code these cells. So this is the first one in terms of how important. So I'm going to click in there and go across as far as I need to. So in the U column, this is the last time we're asking how important, and then we're repeating the questions in the next column to what extent. So these are the first set of questions, and I'm going to colour those in blue. And then this is the second set of questions, the expectations, and I'm going to colour these in pink. And then if I scroll out, you can see that it's quite clear that those are 2 different sets of data.
We're going to look at this data again, but this time we're going to try to make sense of it in terms of the overall central tendency. If we look at the options that people have been given for these questions, they are quite clearly on a scale. Often people would use in their research numbers instead of descriptions, and it's possible that these could have been gathered on a rating scale of 1 to 5, where 1 was not important and 5 was very important and 3 was fairly important. So a scale could have been used, and we're going to make this assumption in terms of coding the data. So we're going to recode the data. So we're going to find and replace very important with the number 5. Fairly important with the number 3. And not important with the number 1. And then we're going to code the expectation data with definitely, number 5, somewhat, as number 3, and does not as number 1. So these codes that have been used I should make a note of so that I can come back and understand the meaning of the codes. Okay, so I have coded all my data. So now that we've coded the data, we can start to analyse the central tendency. What is the average view on each of these questions? We have a picture of how many people, but we haven't kind of summarised that into one set of figures. And so to do that, we're going to calculate the mean. The mean is when you add all the numbers up and divide by how many numbers there are. So every number or response has equal significance. And rather than having to calculate it manually, we can make use of the formulas, and under AutoSum, that drop down arrow gives us an opportunity to calculate the average. It's guessing what I want the average of, but it's not quite right. So I'm going to select it for myself and press enter. So here the mean response to this particular question was 4.77, very close to 5. And remember, when we coded it, 5 was very important. So this is obviously important. In the same way as before, we can now copy that formula across. So we've done the calculation for all of the questions asked. And in order to compare them, we need to label them and we need to move them. So I'm just going to make my life easier because I like colours, and I'm going to colour in the expectations data pink and the importance data blue. And then I'm going to copy the headings from the top and put them with this new calculated data. So it's much easier to see now what the responses are, the mean responses to each question. But it's a little bit messy. Some have got lots of decimal places, some have got no decimal places. So let's be consistent. Let's select them and tell them that we want it to be a number to 2 decimal places. Now I can increase and reduce the number of decimal places using these buttons here. I'm going to put a border around it as well because I quite like tables. And I'm going to include the mean value or label. So if I was looking at this data, I could say which the most important thing to the students is the one with the number nearest to 5, which is the first one. How important is a job that you enjoy? The least important is the one closest to 1, because 1 was not important, and that appears to be 2.97, job that can be combined with parenthood. So we have a summary of the data, but now we're going to use that shortcut tip to present it in a different way so that we can compare what people think is important, the blues, with what people expect to get. And to do that, I'm going to move the figures so that they're underneath because the questions match. I'm going to label it. A lovely shortcut tip: if you want to copy what's in the cell above, hold the control key down and hit the apostrophe and it will copy it. Put a border on there, and then I'm going to turn this around because I like tables the other way around. I'm going to copy it and paste as values. That's to get around the problem of the formulas in the cells. And then I'm going to copy that and paste transpose. And let's just make these very consistent again, like we did before. Number to 2 decimal places. Just pull this one out a little. We're not interested in the title because remember that goes with the column. So this was the blue column. And the other one looks a little bit messy, doesn't it? How about we wrap this text? So select it, right click, format, the alignment to wrap in the centre. I like it, that's better. And then, like we did with the previous one, we don't need the first part of any of these categories. In a table, maybe make these 2 columns slightly wider. And there we have the values of the means. So far, we've calculated how important students think each of the different factors are in terms of choosing a career. And we've also calculated to what extent they would expect each characteristic in their job. And remember, we scaled these on a not important as number 1 and as very important as number 5. So looking at the data, we can see there are a few differences, but not massive differences here. We need to know if those differences are significant. And to do that, we're going to use hypothesis testing. But before we go, we need to make sure the table is labelled. And we can tidy that up a bit by wrapping it. So we right click, format cells, wrap, center it height-wise. And we can see that I've forgotten to add a table number. So I'm just going to edit that. That's table 3 because we already have 2 tables.